Donald Trump has sent his strongest warning yet to Canada, threatening to blow up the Canadian economy if Mark Carney and Doug Ford continue their elbows up trade war. Meanwhile, Doug Ford has launched his most vulgar attack yet against the US president, calling him every insult under the book. And Donald Trump has responded to Doug Ford in a pretty remarkable way. Needless to say, this is all heating up. We're witnessing uncharted territory, and it's about to get real ugly.
Bringing journalism and commentary 1 year anniversary.
I don't believe journalism being funded by the government is the solution.
Rebuild the foundation.
You have to retell the story.
Market conservative
The
perspective.
news that actually matters.
I hence wanted to ask. I think they should answer their questions, especially if they're politically charged with.
My name is Cantin-Nantel. Welcome back to the show. Before we get started, be sure you are subscribed, hype and like the video, hit the notification bell, and consider getting a paid channel membership for less than $5 a month. There was a lot of trade war news on Monday, but the biggest one was what Donald Trump has vowed to do if Canada continues its trade war, and it is more tariffs. And these tariffs could completely devastate the Canadian economy. On Truth Social, Donald Trump said, Canada has been ripping off the United States of America for years. Their ridiculously high tariffs on our farmers and farm products have made life impossible for great American patriots, referring here to American farmers, and has created a $60 billion deficit between our two countries. Now, that's not actually accurate. The reason why there's a trade deficit between Canada and the US is because the US buys a lot of oil from Canada. So I'm going to have to call out Donald Trump here. That argument is not credible. On January 1st, 2027, tariffs on all cars, trucks, both large and small, automotive parts and steel will be increased to 50%. Built in the US, there will be zero tariffs. Canada will be treated like a state no longer. On trade and in many other ways, also, they are among the worst nations in the world to deal with. And here I will point out that Canada is an outlier in its elbows up approach. They feel entitled, and yet we don't need Canada. They need us. They do 95% of their business with the US, with us, the exact opposite. And he ended this with his signature, "Thank you for your attention to this matter." Signed, Donald J. Trump. To put this into plain English, if Donald Trump actually goes ahead with this, we're talking about a blowing up of the Canadian economy. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of lost jobs that are going to affect everyone. And we have to ask ourselves, why are we in this position? And why are no other countries in the world in this position? And this is what I want to remind you, that Canada chose elbows up. China also chose elbows up. The other countries chose to try and make a deal with America, which is supposed to be Canada's greatest ally. But under the Liberals and under Doug Ford, it's become Canada's greatest enemy, apparently, because they love to pick fights with Donald Trump. It's important to note that the counter tariffs that Mark Carney is threatening to impose in September on the US, they will cause more damage to the Canadian economy than the American economy. Economists have said so. But the real carnage will be the further retaliation from the United States, which Donald Trump has not threatened. He has threatened to take this even further, which will cause even more damage to Canada. Remember, all these tariffs are taxes on people. And Mark Carney has responded to the Trump tariffs by announcing 50% taxes on Canadians. And now Donald Trump is going to hike tariffs even more. And not only will Canadians be paying counter tariffs imposed by Mark Carney, their entire economy could be completely decimated by further retaliation. We have to remember, we cannot get emotional here, Canada. The United States has a far stronger economy than we do. Our retaliation hurts us more than it does them. That is simply the reality. You don't have to like Donald Trump. You don't even have to like America to acknowledge that they are simply much more powerful, and we need the US so much is because we can't trade amongst ourselves. Check out this tweet from Harrison Falconer. Daily reminder that Canadian self-imposed provincial trade barriers cost the country $200 billion in lost economic input. Mark Carney promised to deliver interprovincial free trade by July 1, 2025. Where has this gone? Why did Canada make it easier to trade with the US than it did with ourselves? This does not reflect serious policy making. And now we could be in big trouble if Mark Carney decides to keep up this trade war. We could be in serious trouble. And it does not bring me joy to say this. We're talking about people's jobs. We're talking about people's lives here. People's livelihoods matter more than Liberal Party poll numbers, Liberal Party political ambitions, and Liberal Party politics. They really do, Mr. Carney. So, Mr. Prime Minister, it is time to send the negotiators back to Washington to get us a deal. Even if it's not a return to full free trade, we need to spare both countries from a disastrous trade war, just as this article in The Hub argues for.
All right, dance. Come on, dance. Elbows up, but your spine's gon' limp. Talking about strength while you're sipping like a wimp. Mark never said that. Yeah, keep coping. Your brain's on snooze, but your mouth wide open. Elbows up, man, please sit down. NPC script got you looking like a clown. Saying what they say like a broken plug. Hey, let's dance.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford, meanwhile, has decided to go on this tirade against the Americans with new threats and insults that were quite vulgar, if you ask me. So first, Doug Ford said that Canada should be ready to cut electricity to the United States. Then he threatened to cut off critical minerals to the United States, saying, "I'll cut them off. You won't get a grain of sand out of Ontario." And then he held a press conference where he had this to say.
Well, I can go back and forth with Trump. You know, I'm just not gonna take the bait. This guy's a loser. He's gonna be a loser, and simple as that. We're gonna fight with everything we have, and you know something. I have more courage, more brains in my baby toe than he has in his whole body. So there you go. And I have a lot of real estate on my ass, so he has a lot of room to kiss my ass. So I've dealt with guys like you my whole life, and guess what? You all become losers because you're a loser.
You don't even have to like America. You can even like Doug Ford, but you have to ask yourself, how is this useful? Again, Canada is facing economic oblivion if Donald Trump's further tariffs go into place. Canada trades more with the Americans than we do with ourselves. Getting an agreement is paramount at this point. So what does insulting the President of the United States accomplish towards that goal? Pro tip, it doesn't accomplish anything towards that goal. Doug Ford, by saying things like this, is moving Canada further and further away from a trade deal that will save the 90,000 jobs that are currently at risk and brings Canada further towards more tariffs from the US, more counter tariffs from Canada, and possibly hundreds of thousands of job losses. Donald Trump expectedly responded to Doug Ford saying, "Lots of bluster from Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, who is better known as the less charismatic, intelligent, and overall unimpressive brother of the late, great Rob Ford. America has been carrying Canada for decades, but no longer. The USA will always be a far bigger, richer, and stronger country than Canada. Without the United States, Canada couldn't survive. It's where they get all their money because their current bad leadership, primarily Governor Carney and his flunky Ford, they will not be allowed to keep taking advantage of the United States. They're key to survival." Remember, much of the electricity, oil, and gas that Canada gets is transported through the USA. Someone should get these clowns to, quote, fall in line, unquote, or the consequences for Canada will be far worse. Canada's unemployment rate is now 10%. And rapidly rising. Their businesses are fleeing for the United States. That is true, by the way. And again, you don't have to like Donald Trump to acknowledge that that is true. And it's all because of their failed policies and inept leadership. The days of ripping off our farmers and other businesses are over. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. BC Premier David Eby also decided to weigh in. This is what he had to say to Donald Trump.
I feel sorry for Americans right now that they have a president that is so disinterested in their cost of living concerns and is making them a global pariah. I think other countries are watching Canada's response We hope, I hope, we'll be following along at some point. The rest of the world will say enough. In terms of hitting your number one customer with a 50% tariff and expecting that we wouldn't do the same is bizarre.
Again, to this I will say, you don't have to like Trump. In fact, there are quite a few things that Trump has done that I don't like. I wish he would actually care more about the cost of living for Americans. I wish that he would spend less time attacking people that used to support him in the US, calling them traitors and other adjective because they don't support his foreign policy. I wish he would do something about the national debt in the US. But that's all irrelevant when you look at who's the one who's making the accusation. That is BC Premier David Eby. For the Americans watching, this guy belongs to a political party called the NDP. They were behind that ridiculous woke convention that went viral a few months ago. They are the Canadian equivalent of the Democratic Socialists of America. David Eby runs a province, British Columbia, where you'll find the city of Vancouver that has the highest housing prices anywhere in the country and some of the highest housing prices anywhere in the world. Young people are fleeing his province because they know they will never, ever, ever be able to afford a home. They won't even be able to afford a tiny home in his province. And he wants to lecture Donald Trump about affordability? Really, David Eby? And also remember, when you want to talk about prosperity and affecting people, David Eby is a socialist. Socialism has put far more people into misery than Trump's tariffs. That's just a fact. So I'm sorry, David Eby, but you need to take, before you start making comments like the one you just made.
You or someone you know been diagnosed with TDS? The symptoms can be relentless. Fortunately, I'm Dr. Trump, and I have a treatment plan.
We cannot let a deep hatred of Donald Trump take over our emotions and get us into a worse economic state. That would be the worst self-own possible. If we want to showcase Donald Trump in the world that we're a truly sovereign nation, allowing our hatred, our emotions to dictate how we do our policies in this country is not the way to do it. In fact, you just demonstrate to him that this entire country of 40 million people will make its decisions based on Trump. That is not how you show sovereignty. We cannot avoid making a deal simply because we don't like Donald Trump. That would be absolutely reckless and defeating. But unfortunately, the behavior of Canada and of Mark Carney in the last few days has signaled that they're doing exactly that. It's signaling that the deal may have not been that bad and that Mark Carney has decided to trigger this trade war because now they're able to gin up support for elbows up once again. And let's remember, Mark Carney has by-elections coming up, something that even the Americans have noticed. Here's Trump's negotiator, Jameson Greer.
But we sought to accommodate the Canadians by giving them, by cutting tariffs in half on steel, on aluminum, and extensively reducing them on autos and even on things like softwood lumber, accommodating some element of that. Things that are sensitive for the Canadians. They wanted more. I don't know if it was political for them. It certainly doesn't make economic sense, but perhaps for political reasons, they have some by-elections coming up. I don't know, but they came in and they wanted more, and we weren't prepared to do that.
My friends, I'm extremely worried about what comes next. We cannot afford this trade war, especially if it's only being done for political purposes. Mark Carney must send back his negotiators to Washington immediately, not wait until September 8th, which conveniently is after the by-elections, and then impose these tariffs. It is time for us to get a deal. Our jobs rely on it. Our mental health relies on it. Economic hardships are terrible for people's mental health. They really are. We need to get an agreement. It is possible. The U.S. has made agreements with lots of other countries. I've been to Washington. I have heard the Americans tell me they want to make an agreement. It is time to get that agreement. Mark Carney promised he would get a deal. And now, Prime Minister, it is time for you to keep that promise and not threaten to put Canada's entire economy at stake for political purposes. Let's get a deal done. Thank you for watching, and God bless.